Have you ever been judged before you even spoke a word? Imagine boarding a plane, just another business trip, and being told to give up your seat, not because of a mistake, but because of who they think you are. That's what happened to Malcolm Rivers, a quiet, successful black CEO on a flight from Dallas to San Diego. In front of strangers, he was asked to stand, to move, to disappear so that someone more important could take his place. In that moment, he had a choice: stay silent and avoid conflict, or stay seated and demand respect, not with anger, but with calm dignity. What would you do if the world told you to move, not because you were wrong, but because it couldn't see your worth? This is not just a story about one man and one seat. It's about every person who's ever been underestimated, every moment you had to prove that you belonged. Stay with us as we uncover how one act of quiet defiance shook an entire industry and reminded the world what dignity really means. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, because some stories deserve to be heard. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, painting the floor in amber streaks. The air carried that familiar airport hum, rolling suitcases. Coffee orders shouted over the crowd, the distant call of flight numbers echoing through speakers that always sounded slightly tired. At Gate 7, a man sat quietly, with his hands folded on a worn leather briefcase. His shirt was crisp white, the kind you press yourself because you still believe in doing things right. The name on his boarding pass read Malcolm Rivers, and to anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary traveler, polite, composed, maybe a little tired. No one there knew that Malcolm was the CEO of Novalink Technologies, a company whose software quietly powered the scheduling systems of nearly every major airline in the United States. He preferred it that way. Power, he'd learned, was safest when it didn't announce itself. The PA system crackled. Flight 227 to Atlanta now boarding. Group 1. Malcolm stood, adjusted his jacket, and moved toward the line. His seat was 2A first class window, the one spot where he could rest his head against cool glass and think. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the scent of jet fuel mixed with brewed coffee and fresh carpet cleaner, the strange perfume of travel. A flight attendant smiled at him. "Welcome aboard, sir." "Seat 2. Just there on the left." "Thank you," Malcolm said softly, nodding once. He slipped into his seat, placed the briefcase under the chair in front of him, and exhaled. From the corner of his eye, he watched other passengers file in a mix of business travelers tapping on phones, a mother soothing a crying child, an older couple whispering about hotel check-ins, everyday life in motion. Malcolm loosened his tie a little. He loved this part, the stillness before the engine started, before anyone knew where the day would lead. Outside the window, a baggage truck rumbled by, its orange light spinning slowly. The sky above was the color of steel, heavy with the promise of rain. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photo of his mother, standing on the porch of their small house in Birmingham, Alabama, wearing the same smile she'd had when she told him, "Make them respect you without ever raising your voice." He smiled faintly. That line had become his compass. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft gold. A flight attendant passed down the aisle, checking seatbelts. Her name tag read Rachel Carter. She greeted everyone with the same gentle tone, the one that tried to balance warmth with procedure. When she reached Malcolm's row, their eyes met for a brief second, a professional nod. Nothing more. From behind him came the sound of laughter. A group of executives boasting about quarterly numbers and golf trips. The voices were loud enough to belong to people who never had to worry about being told to move. Malcolm glanced forward again and folded his hands. He didn't travel first class for the luxury. He traveled there because, for most of his life, he hadn't been allowed to. The memory of his first business flight still burned being mistaken for a driver, then asked if he was sure he belonged in that section. Years later, even after Forbes covers and keynote speeches, the world still tested his right to belong. A soft announcement buzzed overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be closing the cabin door in approximately 10 minutes. Please take your seats." Rachel moved toward the galley. Another attendant whispered something to her, pointing toward the gate. She frowned, then disappeared up the aisle. Malcolm didn't notice. He was watching the runway lights flicker on one by one, tiny beacons stretching into the distance. The rhythm of the airport always calmed him, a choreography of movement, each signal and sound layered with purpose. He opened his laptop and scanned through the day's report's maintenance metrics, algorithm audits, weather sync data. The numbers danced like an orchestra he alone could hear. Everything was in harmony. A child's laugh broke the monotony. 2 rows ahead, a boy pressed his nose to the window, marveling at the giant plane outside. Malcolm smiled. He remembered that wonder, before the world taught him how small people could make you feel. A faint voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me, Mr. Rivers." He looked up. Rachel stood there again, expression hesitant. Behind her, at the curtain to first class, a man in a gray suit waited, tapping a gold pen against his boarding pass. "Could I have a quick word with you?" she asked. Malcolm closed his laptop and nodded slowly. "Of course," he said. His tone carried the patience of a man who had learned that calm was its own kind of armor. Rachel leaned closer, lowering her voice so others wouldn't hear. "We might need to ask for a small change regarding your seat." Malcolm's brow furrowed slightly. "My seat?" "Yes, sir," she said quickly. "We have a VIP client boarding last minute. The airline's requesting a reassignment. It's temporary. We can offer you 2C instead aisle seat." Malcolm turned toward the window, then back to her. "Is there a reason this client needs 2? Rachel hesitated. "It's protocol for partners of the airline. Sir, they expect that particular row. Behind her." The man in gray shifted impatiently. His expression wasn't rude, just the certainty of someone who'd never been told no. Malcolm nodded once, the kind of nod that didn't mean agreement. He could already feel the familiar weight settling in his chest, that slow, heavy mix of disbelief and exhaustion that came when the world decided you were less important. He looked down at his ticket again, then back at Rachel. "Let's wait until everyone's seated," he said quietly. "Then we'll talk." Rachel straightened, uncertain whether to press further. "Of course, sir," she murmured, retreating toward the galley. Malcolm exhaled. Outside, rain began to speckle the window, tiny dots racing down the glass. The boy 2 rows ahead pressed his hand against it, tracing the trails. Malcolm reached for his phone and opened a message draft to Amira Vaughn, his operations director. He started typing a reminder about the next week's system upgrade, then paused. Something in the air had shifted, a quiet tension threading through the cabin. The man in gray had stepped closer, speaking to another attendant now. Voice low, but sharp. Passengers were pretending not to listen while their eyes darted sideways. Malcolm sat back, jaw tightening just a little. He'd seen this scene too many times. Different settings, same lesson. He remembered being 23, fresh out of grad school, watching a colleague take credit for his design, because the client assumed the black kid in the back was just the intern. He'd promised himself then, never again will I move. Just because someone else thinks they belong more, The engines outside began to hum. A signal light blinked overhead. The pilot's voice came through smooth, routine, detached. Flight 221. Prepare for departure. Malcolm closed his phone, placed it face down on the tray, and looked out into the rain. The wipers swept once across the cockpit glass ahead. The runway lights shimmered like molten gold. He felt the smallest smile touch his lips, not of happiness, but of certainty. Whatever was coming next, he would face it the same way he'd faced everything else, quietly, firmly, without losing himself. And in row 2A, surrounded by murmurs and shifting glances, Malcolm Rivers waited. And somewhere in the unseen circuits of the world, fate began to power up its next sequence. The cabin door had just closed when the tension began to thicken like mist. Passengers settled. Seatbelts clicked. The low hum of air vents filled the silence. From his window seat, Malcolm watched rainwater gather along the wing and slide backward as if the plane itself were already in motion. He sensed the approach before hearing its footsteps. A pause. Then Rachel's soft voice. "Mr. Rivers, I'm so sorry, but we really need to talk again." Behind her stood the man in the gray suit. His expression carried the smug patience of someone accustomed to being obeyed. A silver badge gleamed on his lapel. Horizon Air Executive Partner. Rachel swallowed hard. "Sir, this passenger insists on his assigned seat, and management has approved the change." The man leaned forward. "You heard her. I have an early meeting in Atlanta with our investors. Seat 2A is mine. Let's not make this complicated." Malcolm met his gaze. The man's tone wasn't angry. It was entitled, casual in the way arrogance often pretends to be reasonable. He unbuckled his seatbelt, but instead of standing, he turned slightly toward Rachel. "Tell me," he asked quietly, "what happens if I say no?" She froze. Her training manual hadn't prepared her for this kind of stillness, the kind that carried weight rather than threat. "Then I have to report non-compliance," she whispered. Malcolm nodded slowly. "And if I move, what does that teach him?" Rachel's eyes darted between the two men. "Please, sir, I don't want this to escalate." The man in gray sighed loudly, shaking his head. "This is absurd. Do you even know who I am?" Malcolm finally looked up at him fully. "Do you?" The question hung in the air. A few nearby passengers turned their heads. The older woman in 3B frowned, sensing the invisible fault line forming between civility and humiliation. Rachel took a small step closer. "Mr. Rivers, maybe we can offer you compensation, a travel voucher, additional miles." He raised a hand gently. "You can't pay for dignity. Ms. Carter." Her lips parted, but no words came. The engines began to whine, preparing for taxi. Every sound seemed sharper, like the plane itself was listening. The man's patience snapped. "Enough. I'm calling the supervisor." He pulled out his phone and muttered into it, pacing near the galley. Malcolm sat back, eyes on the window again. Outside, service trucks retreated from the aircraft, leaving streaks of water and light. The world kept moving, indifferent to this small human clash. In his mind, echoes from years past surfaced: the job interview, where he'd been mistaken for security; the business dinner where a waiter had handed him someone else's coat. He thought he had left those moments behind, but prejudice had a way of finding new uniforms. The supervisor arrived moments later, a man named Cole Ramirez, wearing the kind of forced calm reserved for putting out fires. "Good evening, gentlemen," he began. "Let's resolve this quickly. Mr. Rivers, may I ask for your cooperation?" Malcolm turned his eyes toward him. "You may ask," he said softly. Cole blinked. "Sir, company protocol allows us to reassign seats for partner executives. You will, of course, receive full compensation. Malcolm folded his hands. Protocol should never replace judgment. The tone wasn't loud, but it silenced the entire front cabin. Passengers leaned back, pretending not to watch. The man in gray scoffed. Are we seriously debating this move him? I have a flight to catch. Cole looked uneasy. Please, sir, don't make this harder than it has to be. Malcolm's voice lowered another octave. It's already hard. You just don't feel it yet. Rachel's breath caught. She sensed something shifting, an invisible line being crossed. The intercom buzzed cabin crew. Prepare for takeoff. But no one moved. Cole hesitated, glancing toward the cockpit, then back at Malcolm. If you refuse, we'll have to call ground security. Malcolm nodded slowly. Do what you must. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped a message to Amira Vaughn. Seat 2A, Horizon Air. Confirm breach. Then he placed the phone face down again. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she held the service manual against her chest. She looked at him as if asking for permission to be human. He gave a small, reassuring smile. You're just following orders. Right. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to be like this. Neither did I, he said. Yet here we are. The man in gray exhaled loudly. Enough theater. He reached toward the overhead bin to stow his briefcase, his elbow grazing Malcolm's arm. The small contact carried more contempt than force. Malcolm didn't flinch. He simply said, You might want to sit down. The turbulence comes fast. The supervisor gestured sharply to Rachel. Fine. Leave it. We'll handle it after takeoff. He turned away, muttering into his radio. The engines roared. The plane began to roll. In the tense quiet, a voice from behind whispered, Why doesn't he just switch seats? Another voice replied, Because he shouldn't have to. The words rippled through the cabin like a secret prayer. As the aircraft lifted from the ground, Malcolm's reflection in the window merged with the dim city lights below. For a heartbeat, he saw two versions of himself, the man who kept quiet to survive and the one who refused to shrink anymore. The seatbelt sign chimed. The cabin leveled. Rachel returned, her face pale. She crouched beside his seat. Sir, I know you're upset, but please try to enjoy the flight. I'll make sure you're comfortable. Malcolm glanced at her. Comfort isn't the point. She nodded, whispering, I know. For a moment, compassion passed between them, small, fragile, but real. The man in gray unfolded a newspaper, as if nothing had happened. The printed headline read, Horizon Air celebrates record profits. Malcolm's gaze lingered on those words. Profits built on respect withheld. He wondered how many silent passengers before him had chosen peace over principle. He closed his eyes and inhaled. Every injustice leaves a mark, he thought, but this one would not fade quietly. When the drink cart came around, he declined. He didn't need coffee. What he needed was time to decide what his next move would mean, not just for him, but for everyone who'd ever been asked to move out of their rightful place. Below them, the storm clouds broke apart. Shafts of sunlight cut through, illuminating the wings. Rachel paused in the aisle, caught by the sight. She whispered, Looks like the weather's clearing. Malcolm opened his eyes. Not everywhere, he said softly. The plane continued eastward, slicing through layers of cloud and conscience. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled faint but steady, as if the sky itself was keeping score. For a long while, no one spoke. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the engines, and the occasional clink of ice from the galley. Most passengers buried themselves behind screens or newspapers, pretending they hadn't just witnessed a standoff in seat 2A. Malcolm sat still, his gaze fixed on the faint reflection of his own face in the window. Outside, the sky was a layered gray fading into indigo, the last light of Seattle far behind them. He found himself watching the way the clouds folded beneath the plane, smooth and silent. There was peace out there, the kind that didn't exist inside human hearts. Rachel moved quietly up the aisle, checking on passengers. When she reached his row, she paused, her expression heavy with guilt. "Would you like some water, Mr. Rivers?" He looked up, meeting her eyes for the briefest second. "No, thank you." Her hands tightened around the tray. "I wish this had gone differently." Malcolm gave a small nod. "It still can," he said. "Just depends on who learns from it." She hesitated as if wanting to say more, then turned to continue her work. The man in gray sat one seat over in 2C, flipping through a tablet, his lips curved in a faint, self-satisfied smirk. At one point, he leaned closer. "You know, it's not personal. This is just how things work in business. Some people are priority, some aren't." Malcolm turned his head slightly, voice even. "And you've built an entire life believing that's normal." The man chuckled softly. "It's called hierarchy. You of all people should understand that." Malcolm's tone was calm, almost conversational. "Oh, I do. I just prefer mine built on merit, not melanin." The smirk faltered. For a moment, the man said nothing, only shifted in his seat. Then he muttered, "You people always make everything about race." Malcolm didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence can be heavier than any argument. Rachel's eyes flicked toward them from the galley. Worry etched across her face. She could feel the eyes of passengers sneaking glances, unsure whether they were watching a confrontation or a lesson unfold. Malcolm leaned back, closed his eyes briefly. He wasn't angry, not anymore. Anger was a fire he'd learned to master years ago, when he realized calmness unsettled people far more than rage ever could. The minutes passed slowly. Somewhere behind him, a woman whispered, "He's the CEO of something, I think." Another answered, "Doesn't matter." They didn't see it. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence. The cabin lights flickered once. Rachel steadied herself against a seat back. Malcolm looked out again. Lightning flashed in the distance far away, silent but visible. A storm out there, another within. He thought of his father, a mechanic who worked nights fixing planes for other men's companies. His father used to say, "Engines don't care who builds them. They only care if you know what you're doing." It was the lesson that built Novalink Precision. Quiet excellence, power beneath the surface. He opened his phone under the dim reading light. A message from Amira Vaughn appeared. "Received your note. Everything okay?" He typed back slowly. "Not yet, but it will be." Then locked the screen. Halfway through the flight, Rachel approached again. Her voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Rivers, there's been a request from the cockpit. The operations supervisor wants to verify your ticket information for records. It's protocol." Malcolm tilted his head. "Is it? Or is that just another word for profiling?" She didn't answer. Instead, she lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I just have to follow procedure." He sighed softly, reached into his briefcase, and handed over the boarding pass along with his ID. "Here, make sure they spell the name right this time." Rachel accepted it with trembling fingers. "Thank you." When she walked away, Malcolm leaned back again. The man in gray muttered something under his breath, too quiet to catch all of it. But the words, overreacting and sensitive, drifted through. Malcolm ignored him. He reached for the small photo in his pocket again. His mother, standing proud on that Birmingham porch. Her eyes seemed to tell him, "Stay steady, son. Dignity has its own gravity." The flight continued. The cabin darkened. The world outside now pitch black, except for the blinking red light on the wing. Somewhere over the Rockies, a voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting mild turbulence. Please remain seated." The plane rocked gently, a reminder of how fragile control can be at 35,000 feet. In that moment, Malcolm felt a deep stillness settle inside him. This wasn't just about one seat, one flight, or one insult. It was about every quiet moment when someone decided that respect was optional. He looked at the reflection of his face in the window again, barely visible against the dark. A thought passed through his mind. Quiet, but sharp. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The turbulence eased. Rachel reappeared, returning his documents. She lingered beside him. "Thank you for being patient, Mr. Rivers, for what it's worth. I hope your evening gets better." He offered her a small, weary smile. "That depends on how much truth survives the landing." She looked puzzled, but nodded and walked away. A few rows back, a passenger discreetly raised his phone, pretending to scroll but actually recording. Wordless witnesses, all pretending it wasn't happening. Malcolm closed his eyes again, replaying the man's words in his head. "Some people are priority." It echoed like static. He knew what came next: denial, excuses, quiet damage control. But he also knew something they didn't. Horizon Air's entire infrastructure ran on Novalink's integrated scheduling grid. Every route, every aircraft, every timestamp was a heartbeat in the system he had built. And no system survived long when its architect decided to stop keeping it alive. He opened his eyes, gaze steady now. The calm before a storm never looked dangerous until the lightning struck. Rachel dimmed the cabin lights further, and the plane settled into its cruise. Passengers drifted into sleep, unaware that a chain of consequences had already begun to form. At 38,000 feet, amid quiet breathing and soft engine noise, Malcolm Rivers sat awake, his mind building equations of ethics and power. Somewhere deep in that logic, a decision began to take shape, not born from anger, but from resolve. He took one last look out the window. The moon had risen above the clouds, silver and silent. He whispered under his breath, words no one could hear. "Let them think it's over." The man in gray yawned, oblivious. Rachel walked by, stealing a nervous glance at Malcolm, who now looked completely calm, the kind of calm that comes right before change. "Up front," the pilot's voice broke the silence again. Routine and harmless. "We'll be landing in Atlanta in approximately 2 hours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." But for one man in seat 2A, the flight was already a battlefield. The lights in the cabin had softened to a muted amber. Most passengers were asleep now, heads tilted against headrests, faces lit by the quiet flicker of seat monitors. The hum of the engines felt steady, hypnotic, almost enough to convince everyone that peace had returned. Almost. Malcolm Rivers had not slept. His gaze stayed fixed on the narrow beam of moonlight cutting across the wing. It glimmered in the darkness, fragile but constant, like a thought that refused to fade. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of his armrest. From a distance, he looked perfectly calm. Inside, however, the silence was full of movement memories, restraint, and an ache that had followed him for a lifetime. He could still hear Mr. Langford's careless words echoing. Some people are priority. That sentence had weight, not because it was new, but because it was ancient, repeated in boardrooms, classrooms, airports, and quiet corners of history. Rachel Carter passed through the aisle once more. When she reached him, she paused. Her hands clutched a folded napkin, and her voice was almost a whisper. "Mr. Rivers, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of this." Malcolm turned his head slowly. "You're not the one who needs to apologize." "I know," she said softly, her eyes shining. "But I could have done more. I just froze." He shook his head. "Doing nothing isn't the same as agreeing. You still saw what was wrong. Most people don't even do that." Rachel swallowed hard, guilt pressing on her chest. "What will you do when we land?" "Sometimes," Malcolm said, "the best response isn't noise. It's consequence." The words made her shiver, not because they sounded vengeful, but because they were measured. They came from a man who'd learned the art of patience, the kind that changes everything. Rachel nodded slowly. "You're not angry, are you?" "I've been angry before," he replied. "It never fixed anything, but principle that changes worlds." She lingered for a moment longer, then walked back toward the galley. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, inhaling the faint scent of coffee and metal. His mind drifted to his mother again. He could almost hear her voice. "When they forget your worth, remind them by standing still." He reached for his phone, scrolled through a list of contacts, and stopped at Amira Vaughn's name. The last message still glowed on the screen. Not yet, but it will be. He began typing again. "Initiate internal audit. Horizon Air priority contracts only." He didn't press send yet. He waited, letting the decision settle in his chest. Across the aisle, Mr. Langford stirred, adjusting his seat with a groan. He caught Malcolm watching him and smirked. "Still awake? You really hold a grudge, don't you?" Malcolm's tone was cool. No grudge, just perspective. Langford chuckled quietly. "Look, don't take it personally. These things happen. You can't expect everyone to bend the rules for you." "I didn't ask anyone to bend them," Malcolm said, "just to follow them." Langford raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound so noble. But let's be honest. You got lucky enough to sit here in the first place." Malcolm studied him for a moment. "Luck doesn't build companies, Mr. Langford. Effort does." Langford's jaw tightened. He looked away, muttering, "You people always think effort changes everything." Malcolm's voice dropped low. "Steady as a heartbeat. No, I think integrity does. That's what you can't fake." Langford didn't respond. The tension in the small space between them was so thick it felt like another passenger had joined their row silent, watchful, unrelenting. A soft chime broke the stillness. The seatbelt sign blinked on. The captain's voice floated overhead, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Atlanta. Local time is 11:47 p.m. Please return to your seats and secure your belongings." Rachel's voice followed soon after, practiced but strained. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." As the plane tilted gently downward, lights from the city began to bloom beneath them like stars scattered across the ground. Malcolm watched them, the glow reflecting faintly in his eyes. The descent was smooth until turbulence struck without warning. The aircraft jolted, gas rippling through the cabin. Rachel grabbed a seat back for balance. Langford cursed under his breath, gripping his armrest. Malcolm stayed still, unfazed. "Don't worry," he murmured. "Eyes on the wing. Control systems will stabilize soon." Langford frowned. How would you know Malcolm didn't look at him? Because I built the software that keeps this plane from falling. For the first time, Langford's confidence cracked. You. What Novalink Technologies? Malcolm said quietly. That's me. You've been flying safely because of my work. Every plane your company owns runs on my system. Langford stared at him, speechless. His mouth opened, then closed. The arrogance drained from his expression, replaced by something close to fear. Malcolm turned his gaze forward again. Tell me again who belongs here. The plane steadied. Rachel's voice came over the intercom, announcing final descent. But within the cabin, everything had changed. The quiet respect that had been absent for hours finally filled the air. As they landed, no one clapped, no one spoke. The hum of the slowing engines carried a strange weight, as if even the machine understood the gravity of what had just been revealed. When the plane rolled to a stop and the seatbelt light blinked off, passengers began standing. Rachel met Malcolm's eyes from across the cabin. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face spoke volumes: gratitude, admiration, apology, all mixed together. Langford stood awkwardly, fumbling for his briefcase. His hands shook slightly. He tried to meet Malcolm's gaze but couldn't. Instead, he muttered, "You could have said something earlier." "I did," Malcolm replied calmly. "You just weren't listening." Rachel opened the door, letting in the cool rush of terminal air. Passengers shuffled out one by one, but Malcolm remained seated until the last of them had gone. When the cabin was empty, Rachel approached him. "Mr. Rivers, thank you for how you handled everything tonight." He rose, collecting his briefcase. "It wasn't about handling it," he said. "It was about remembering who I am." She nodded, voice trembling. "If you ever need a flight attendant who actually listens, I'd work for you in a heartbeat." That made him smile small, genuine. "Keep that heart," he said softly. "It's rare in the sky." She watched as he walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused, looked back once. "Take care. Miss Carter. You too. Mr. Rivers." As he stepped into the jet bridge, the hum of the airport returned the same mix of footsteps, rolling bags, and distant chatter. But for Malcolm, the world felt sharper now, more defined. Every small sound reminded him of how easily respect could be erased and how powerful it was to reclaim it. Outside, his driver Michael Torres waited beside a black sedan. The man straightened when he saw him. "Long flight." Sir Malcolm's voice was even, longer than it should have been. Michael opened the door. "Home." Malcolm shook his head. "Office." The city of Atlanta glittered in the distance, alive and unaware of what had unfolded in the sky above it. As the car pulled away, Malcolm watched the planes lifting into the night, their lights blinking against the darkness. "People forget," he murmured, half to himself. "Even gravity has consequences." Michael glanced at him through the mirror. "Something happened up there." Malcolm looked out at the horizon. "Not yet, but it will." The sedan merged onto the freeway, tires whispering against wet asphalt. Behind them, Horizon Air Flight 227 was being logged into Novalink's system, a line of code among millions. But in the quiet space of Malcolm's mind, that single flight had already become a turning point. Tomorrow, the world would still move, planes would still fly, and people would still make assumptions. But tonight, as he rode through the sleeping city, one truth settled deep in his chest: respect, once tested, was no longer negotiable. He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the car replace the echo of the engines. For the first time that day, Malcolm Rivers felt something close to peace, not because he had won, but because he hadn't moved. Dawn crept slowly across Atlanta, spreading thin light across the glass towers. From the 23rd floor of Novalink's headquarters, the city looked peaceful, quiet streets, wet from night rain, reflecting the pale blush of morning. But inside the building, the air was already electric. Malcolm Rivers stood by the window of his office, one hand resting in his pocket, the other holding a cup of black coffee that had gone cold. He hadn't slept. He didn't need to. The quiet from the night before had become clarity. Behind him, the door opened softly. Amira Vaughn entered, tablet in hand, her dark eyes alert. She wore the same navy suit she'd worn the day before, but her expression carried the sharp focus of someone who understood that something had shifted. "They've made the news," she said. A passenger filmed part of the exchange. "It's everywhere, social feeds, morning talk shows, even national outlets." Malcolm didn't turn around. "What's the headline?" "Man in 2A stands his ground." He smiled faintly, still looking out at the skyline. Poetic. Amira hesitated. "Do you want me to issue a statement?" "No," he said quietly. "Let them speak first." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Horizon Air's legal team called twice this morning. They're concerned. The footage shows their partner, Mr. Langford, demanding your seat. It doesn't look good." Malcolm finally turned. His eyes, usually warm, were now steady and cold. "Then they should have been concerned yesterday." Amira nodded, unlocking her tablet. "I reviewed our contracts with them. They're tied to us on every critical system fleet scheduling, predictive maintenance, route optimization. If Novalink goes dark for them even a few hours, they can't keep their planes in the air." "Pull everything," Malcolm said. Her brows lifted slightly. "All at once?" "Yes." "Suspend priority service. No response to their tickets or updates until further notice. But do it quietly. No public statement." Amira hesitated again. "Malcolm, are you sure you want to start this war?" He set the coffee cup down, his tone low but unwavering. "It's not a war." "Amira, it's gravity. You ignore it long enough, it reminds you who's in charge." For a moment, silence filled the room. Only the hum of the city below and the soft whir of the air conditioning could be heard. Then Amira tapped the screen decisively. "Consider it done." Malcolm nodded. "Thank you." He turned back toward the window. Down below, traffic began to stir. People heading to work, unaware that somewhere above them, a single decision had already begun to change the flight patterns of a major airline. At Horizon Air's headquarters in Chicago, Douglas Hale slammed his palm against the edge of a conference table. "Why are we losing sync with Novalink servers? Someone fix it." A group of engineers hunched over laptops. One of them stammered, "Sir, it's not a technical failure. Their system's blocking our access. It's deliberate." "Deliberate," Hale barked. "Why the hell would they?" Another voice cut in. "Sir, the incident last night. It's trending worldwide. People are calling for boycotts. They're saying Horizon discriminates against passengers." Hale froze, then straightened. "Discriminates over one seat." The young analyst swallowed. "It's not about the seat, sir. It's about what it means." Hale's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number read simply, "Respect keeps you in the air." His jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask who sent it. Back in Atlanta. Amira entered Malcolm's office again, face pale but composed. "We're already seeing results. Horizon's East Coast flights are delayed. Their servers are timing out from the withdrawal. Malcolm exhaled slowly, not triumphantly, but with the quiet calm of someone watching cause meet effect. People think respect is a courtesy, he said. It's not. It's infrastructure. Amira studied him for a moment. And what about Rachel Carter? She reached out to the company this morning. She's been suspended for not enforcing policy. She asked if you were all right. Malcolm's expression softened. Send her a message. Tell her she did better than she thinks. He walked toward his desk, fingertips brushing over the smooth wood. The letterhead papers lay in a neat stack: company memos, contracts, reports. So much of his life was built on order, logic, precision. Yet, this was the first time he felt like his actions were rewriting more than data. They were rewriting memory itself. At that same hour, in a news studio across town, a clip from Flight 227 played on loop. The video showed Malcolm's calm refusal, Langford's arrogance, Rachel's discomfort. The reporter's voice narrated over it, a quiet act of resistance on Horizon Air. Flight 227 has sparked global discussion about race, power, and dignity in corporate America. The segment cut to an older woman interviewed outside the airport. It was Evelyn Shaw, the passenger from 3B. He didn't raise his voice, she said firmly. He didn't need to. Sometimes, dignity speaks louder than noise. The clip went viral within hours. Hashtags filled the digital landscape. The man in 2A. Respect in the air. Flyfair. Inside Horizon's boardroom. Panic spread. Langford sat in the corner, pale and silent. His phone buzzed with unread messages, none of them kind. He looked up at Hale, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know who he was. Hale glared at him. You didn't have to know. You just had to be decent. In Atlanta. Malcolm's phone vibrated again. It was a message from Amira. They're calling nonstop. Hale wants to speak personally. Malcolm typed back. Let him wait. For the rest of the morning. The building around him hummed with restrained chaos, legal teams whispering, emails firing, systems redirecting. Yet Malcolm remained still, seated at his desk, pen in hand, signing off on a new initiative, the Human Dignity Protocol. It wasn't a public policy yet, but it would be a clause built into every future Novalink contract, ensuring that partnerships weren't just measured in profit, but in principle. Amira stepped in one last time, holding a printed report. You should see this. Horizon's market value dropped 15% in 2 hours. Investors are demanding answers. Malcolm leaned back, eyes tired but alive. Then maybe they'll find them in the mirror. Amira smiled faintly. You know, most people would call this revenge. He looked at her, calm as ever. Revenge is emotional. This is education. Outside. Sunlight struck the side of the glass tower, scattering reflections across the room. Malcolm turned toward it, his voice quiet but sure. They thought a seat was just a seat, but sometimes a seat is a lesson. The day moved on, but the echoes of that sentence traveled far beyond Novalink's walls. Across the country, employees, passengers, and executives alike replayed the footage of a man who hadn't shouted, hadn't fought, but had simply refused to move and somehow shifted the ground beneath an entire industry. In the quiet of his office, Malcolm finally sat down, opened his laptop, and began drafting a letter addressed to no one in particular. It started with 5 simple words. This is how change begins. He paused, let the words sink in, and then typed the next line. Not with noise, but with stillness that demands to be seen. Outside, planes streaked across the Atlanta sky. their contrails glowing white against the blue. Somewhere among them, Horizon Air's fleet struggled to stay on schedule, their world no longer running as smoothly as before. Malcolm Rivers closed his laptop and looked out the window. The city glowed brighter now, alive and awake. He whispered, almost to himself, "Let them learn." 2 days after Flight 227, the world had learned the name Malcolm Rivers. News outlets ran looping footage of the calm man in Seat 2A refusing to move. Headlines labeled him everything from the quiet protester to the CEO who grounded an airline. Opinion columns filled with praise and debate, while online forums lit up with stories from passengers who had faced similar humiliation but never fought back. In downtown Atlanta, Novalink's lobby was unusually crowded. Journalists lingered near the elevators, their voices echoing across marble floors. Employees passed by with hushed awe. Inside, on the top floor, Malcolm stood at the head of the conference room, the walls lined with glass that overlooked the morning skyline. Amira entered, holding a folder thick with updates. "You've started something you can't stop," she said softly. He glanced at her, calm but unreadable. "Good. Horizon's in free fall," she continued. "Half their routes are grounded. Investors are fleeing. Their CEO, Douglas Hale, just called for an emergency press conference. They're trying to paint this as a misunderstanding." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Misunderstanding? That's a creative word for discrimination." She gave a faint smile, though her tone remained serious. "There's something else. The Department of Transportation has opened an ethics inquiry. They've requested access to all flight logs and passenger complaints linked to Horizon. This is going bigger than we thought." Malcolm crossed to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Below, traffic wound through the city like veins of silver. "The truth always grows when it's buried," he said. Amira hesitated. "And what about the employees Horizon? Just suspended Rachel Carter indefinitely. She's being scapegoated for not forcing you to move." Malcolm's jaw tightened slightly. "That won't stand." He turned, his voice firm but composed. "Draft a letter. To her, personally. Tell her I'm offering her a position here, Ethics and Human Relations Division. She deserves to work where integrity isn't punished." Amira nodded. "I'll handle it." At that same moment, in Chicago, the Horizon Air building trembled with chaos. Reporters swarmed the lobby. Inside the boardroom, Douglas Hale faced his directors, each one more frantic than the last. A large monitor displayed a live feed from financial networks. The headline scrolled across the bottom: Horizon Air faces record losses after discrimination scandal. Hale rubbed his temples. "Enough. We'll issue a statement apologizing to Mr. Rivers and the passengers. Then we'll move forward." One executive spoke up cautiously. "Sir, it might not be that simple. Novalink has cut our access to critical systems. If they don't restore service, we can't operate. Flights will remain grounded." Hale snapped. "Then call him. Call Rivers directly." The room went silent. After a long pause, his assistant spoke softly. "We've tried. He won't take the call." Hale's eyes darkened. "Then I'll go to him myself." Back in Atlanta, Malcolm's office was quieter. The storm outside belonged to the world, not him. He sat at his desk reading through reports, calm amid the chaos. Michael Torres entered, holding a small envelope. This came by courier. "Sir, from Horizon's headquarters." Malcolm accepted it and unfolded the letter. It was handwritten, "Mr. Rivers, I request a meeting, face to face. No lawyers, no cameras. Just two men discussing the cost of misunderstanding. Douglas Hale Malcolm read it twice, then set it down. "He's coming here," he said quietly. Amira frowned. "Do you want me to prepare security?" "No," he replied. "Prepare tea." That afternoon, the elevator doors opened, and Douglas Hale stepped out, flanked by two aides. He was older than Malcolm expected, late 50s. Silver hair, posture strained by the weight of public failure. Amira greeted them politely and led him into the office. Hale extended a hand. "Mr. Rivers, thank you for seeing me." Malcolm shook it once, brief and measured. "You didn't leave much room to say no." They sat opposite each other at a round table near the window. Between them, the city stretched endlessly, a reflection of power and fragility all at once. Hale exhaled. "I'll be direct. Our company's bleeding. Flights are grounded. Investors are walking. And every major network has turned us into a headline. I came here to ask, what will it take to make this right?" Malcolm studied him. "You mean to make it go away?" Hale hesitated. "I mean to fix it, then start by naming it." Malcolm said, "You called it a misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was a choice, made by people you empowered to see others as lesser." Hale's gaze dropped. "You're right." For a moment, the admission hung between them like a crack of sunlight through heavy clouds. Malcolm leaned forward slightly. "This isn't about your airline anymore. It's about what it represents. Every system that runs on assumption instead of respect eventually breaks. You're living proof." Hale's voice softened. "I didn't know it would go this far." "You didn't think it could," Malcolm replied. "But dignity doesn't stop at the door of first class. Outside." Thunder rolled distantly, low and steady. Hale's hands trembled slightly. "If I sign a public statement acknowledging fault, if I restore your contracts, will you bring Novalink back online?" Malcolm's expression didn't change. "You misunderstand again. This isn't negotiation. This is correction." He stood and crossed to the window. "You've spent years flying higher than accountability. Now you're grounded by the very systems you ignored." Hale rose too, his face pale. "So this is retribution." Malcolm turned back, eyes calm but piercing. "No, it's reflection." They stood in silence, the city light flickering across the glass between them. Finally, Hale nodded. "Defeated. Then we'll release the statement tonight. Public apology, full admission, and a diversity reform initiative. It's time." Malcolm inclined his head. "Then you're finally learning how to fly." As Hale left, Amira entered quietly. "What did he say?" "He's ready to apologize," Malcolm said. "Let's see if he means it." That evening, news outlets interrupted their broadcast to our Horizons public statement. Douglas Hale appeared on screen, his voice subdued. What happened aboard Flight 227 was not just a mistake, it was a moment of truth. We failed to see a customer as a human being first. For that, I apologize to Mr. Malcolm Rivers and to everyone who's ever been made to feel unseen. In Atlanta, Malcolm watched from his office. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He simply turned off the monitor and looked out at the glowing skyline. Change, he knew, didn't happen in speeches. It happened in the quiet decisions that followed. Behind him, Amira spoke softly. "You did it. Malcolm, you made them listen." He shook his head gently. "No, they made themselves listen. I just refused to move." Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. Planes passed overhead, their lights flickering in the night. Malcolm stood by the window, his reflection merging with the city lights, his voice barely audible. Maybe this time, they'll remember who keeps them in the air. A week after the public apology, the world had shifted, not by force, not by spectacle, but by a kind of quiet reckoning that rippled across boardrooms, airports, and living rooms alike. At Novalink's headquarters, sunlight spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows, warm and golden. The tension that had once hung heavy was gone, replaced by something steadier purpose. Malcolm Rivers stood at the center of the main conference room, where reporters had once begged for statements he refused to give. Today, the room was filled not with cameras, but with people, employees, technicians, managers, faces from every background, gathered not to celebrate revenge, but reflection. At the front, a small sign read "Dignity in Practice, the New Code of Conduct." Amira Vaughn stood at the podium, poised and confident. "We've always said technology is neutral," she began. "But the people who build it are not. The systems we create shape how the world treats one another. And so, from this day forward, every Novalink partnership will include one condition: respect is not optional." The room erupted in quiet applause. Malcolm watched from the back, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He preferred to let others speak now. The message had grown larger than him, as it was always meant to. When the applause faded, Amira turned toward him. "Malcolm, would you like to say something?" He hesitated, then stepped forward, his footsteps soft on the marble floor. As he reached the front, the room fell still. "I don't have much to add," he said, his voice even, almost gentle, "except this: we didn't start a fight. We started a reminder. Every person here deserves to be seen for who they are, not what others assume." He paused, looking around the room. "The world doesn't change because we shout louder. It changes when we stand quietly, refusing to move from what's right." The words sank deep. There was no clapping this time, just the kind of silence that carried weight. When the meeting ended, Malcolm lingered near the window, watching the city below. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. Amira joined him, holding a folder. "It's official," she said. "Rachel's accepted the position. She starts Monday." Malcolm nodded, his tone softening. "Good. She deserves a sky that doesn't clip her wings." Amira smiled. "You have a way with words. You know." He chuckled lightly. "Words only matter if people remember them." Across the room, a television played on mute. The news headline read Horizon Air launches new diversity initiative. CEO Douglas Hale promises culture over profit. Malcolm's gaze drifted toward it briefly. "Do you believe him?" Amira asked. "Maybe," he said. He's learned humility the hard way. But growth starts somewhere. In Chicago, meanwhile, Douglas Hale sat in his own glass office, the city stretching beneath him. The press had calmed, but the scars remained: shareholders skeptical, employees cautious. On his desk sat a printed letter, unsigned, a personal note to Malcolm Rivers. He read it again. "You didn't just ground my planes. You grounded my pride. Maybe I needed that." He set down his pen and exhaled. For the first time in years, he didn't feel angry. He felt accountable. Back in Atlanta, evening shadows crept across Malcolm's office. Michael Torres entered quietly, carrying a folder of travel itineraries. "You're speaking in D.C. next week," he said. "The Civil Aviation Forum. They've asked you to talk about ethics in automation." Malcolm looked up from his paperwork. "Do they want ethics, or do they want headlines?" Michael grinned. "Maybe both." Malcolm laughed softly. Then I'll give them the first, and let the second take care of itself. He set the file aside and leaned back in his chair. You know, Michael, it's strange, all this noise. And it started because someone thought I didn't belong in a seat I paid for. Michael's reply was gentle. Sometimes the smallest insult teaches the biggest lesson. Outside, the city lights flickered on tiny stars of human invention trying to outshine the night. The next morning, Novalink's inbox overflowed with messages from around the world. Students, entrepreneurs, flight attendants, even corporate executives wrote to say how the story had changed them. One message stood out. It came from Evelyn Shaw, the elderly passenger from row 3B. Dear Mr. Rivers, I wanted to thank you. That night, you didn't raise your voice, but somehow you spoke for all of us who've been made to feel small. You reminded me that silence can be strength when it comes from dignity, not fear. Evelyn Shaw. Malcolm read it twice, then pinned the letter beside his desk. Some victories weren't measured in contracts or headlines, they lived in words like those. Later that afternoon, Amira walked in again, excitement brightening her usually composed face. You'll want to see this. She turned on the projector. On the screen appeared a series of social media posts, videos of airport staff installing new signage inspired by Novalink's code. At every Horizon Air gate, a new message now read, "Every seat has worth." Malcolm stared at the screen for a long moment. They used our phrasing. Amira nodded. Seems your words stuck. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Malcolm said quietly, Maybe that's enough. Amira tilted her head. Enough for what? For change to last. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, pattering gently against the windows. Malcolm stepped closer to the glass, watching droplets race down the surface, merging and splitting again. You ever notice, he said, how raindrops never fight to be first? They all fall, but somehow together they make something larger. Amira smiled. You should save that for your speech. He shook his head. It's not a speech. It's just life. The room fell quiet again, filled only with the sound of rain and the hum of distant traffic. Across the world, the story of Flight 227 was already being studied in leadership seminars and ethics programs. Analysts called it the case of the seat that changed policy. Activists called it a new chapter in quiet resistance. But for Malcolm Rivers, it wasn't about movements or labels. It was about a truth his mother had taught him long before he owned a suit, or a company respect isn't earned by power. It's proven by grace. That night, as the last of the staff left the building, Malcolm remained in his office. He turned off the lights and watched the city shimmer in the dark. He thought of Rachel, starting fresh, of Hale, learning humility, of Evelyn, who saw meaning in silence, and of every person who might someday face a moment like his. He whispered into the quiet room, "Don't move until it matters." Then, with a deep breath, he gathered his coat and stepped into the hallway, the sound of rain following him all the way to the elevator. The storm outside was soft now. No thunder, no lightning, just the rhythm of renewal. The ballroom of the Civil Aviation Forum gleamed with soft golden light. Polished chandeliers hung above a sea of dark suits and crisp uniforms, the air thick with the scent of coffee and quiet anticipation. It wasn't just another conference. It was where the leaders of the airline industry came to defend, define, and sometimes redeem themselves. At the back of the room, Amira Vaughn adjusted the microphone on the podium. Her calm professionalism hid the pride stirring beneath. He's on his way, she whispered to the event coordinator. Outside, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the entrance. Michael Torres stepped out first, scanning the crowd before opening the rear door. Malcolm Rivers emerged, dressed simply in a tailored gray suit. No flash, no entourage, just presence the kind that made silence follow him like gravity. He paused a moment, glancing up at the Capitol dome in the distance. For a fleeting second, the memory of Flight 227 flickered in his mind, the hum of engines, the flicker of lightning, the quiet moment when he refused to move. Michael's voice broke his thoughts. "You ready for this, sir?" Malcolm gave a small smile. "I've been ready since seat 2A." Inside the ballroom, the chatter quieted as he entered. Cameras turned, flashes sparked, but he didn't look their way. He walked straight to the stage, greeted by polite applause that grew warmer with every step. Amira met his eyes as he passed her, and for a brief second, their shared glance said everything. This wasn't about revenge or power. It was about memory, about what people choose to do once the noise fades. He stood behind the podium and waited. The room hushed. "Good evening," Malcolm began, his tone soft but commanding. "A month ago, I boarded a plane like millions do every day. I didn't know that flight would turn into a mirror, one that reflected how easily we can forget to see one another." The crowd leaned in. Every word seemed to fall with deliberate weight. "I was asked to give up my seat," he continued, "not for safety, not for error, but for assumption. And in that moment, I was reminded that the smallest moments often reveal the largest truths." He paused, letting the silence breathe. The only sound was the distant hum of cameras. "When I chose to stay seated, I didn't do it to make headlines. I did it because every person deserves to belong where they've earned the right to be. Dignity isn't a luxury. It's the oxygen of any civilized society." Across the room, executives who had once dismissed the story now sat motionless. Douglas Hale, seated near the front, lowered his eyes. He had insisted on being there, even when his advisors said it would draw criticism. Malcolm continued, his voice steady but full of quiet conviction. "For years, we've built systems designed to move faster, reach higher, automate everything. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that the most important system is human. No software can compensate for a failure of respect." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. He looked up, meeting their eyes. "The question isn't how high we fly. It's how we treat people when we think no one's watching." At that moment, the screen behind him came to life, displaying Novalink's new initiative, the Human Dignity Protocol. Photos and footage of employees filled the background. Technicians, pilots, attendants, passengers, all connected by a single caption: "Every seat has worth." Applause rose, slow but sincere. Amira, standing at the side of the stage, felt tears sting her eyes. When the clapping subsided, Malcolm concluded softly, "Airlines don't stay in the sky because of engines or algorithms. They stay there because of trust, and trust is earned, one act of respect at a time." He stepped back from the podium. The applause that followed was no longer polite. It was thunderous. People rose to their feet, some clapping, some wiping tears. Among them, Douglas Hale stood as well. When the noise faded, he made his way to the front of the stage. For a heartbeat, the crowd seemed unsure what would happen next. Hale extended his hand. "Mr. Rivers," he said, his voice clear and humble, "you grounded my company, but you lifted the standard for all of us. Thank you." Malcolm shook his hand, firm but without triumph. "Then keep it flying," he replied quietly. The cameras flashed again, capturing the handshake, the moment when accountability met redemption. Later that evening, the crowd spilled into the lobby. Conversations buzzed with new energy. Some spoke of reform, others of policy. But everyone spoke of one thing: the man in seat 2A. In the quiet that followed, Malcolm stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered on the Potomac. Amira joined him, her voice gentle. "You did what you came here to do." He shook his head slightly. "Not yet. Change doesn't start with speeches. It starts when people go home and decide who they want to be tomorrow." She smiled. "Then I'd say tomorrow looks brighter already." As they walked toward the car, a young reporter caught up to him. "Mr. Rivers, one question. What do you hope people remember most about all this?" Malcolm stopped, thoughtful. That a seat isn't just a place to sit. It's a reminder that everyone belongs somewhere. The reporter lowered her mic, smiling quietly. Michael opened the car door. Malcolm took one last look at the city before stepping inside. Through the window, he saw planes crossing the night sky, their lights flickering like constellations. He thought of Rachel, now thriving in her new role, of Amira, standing beside him through every storm, of Evelyn, whose letter still hung in his office, and of every nameless traveler who'd ever been told they didn't belong. The hum of the car engine blended with the faint roar of aircraft above. Michael glanced back from the driver's seat. "Where to?" Sir Malcolm smiled faintly. "Home. I think the sky can manage itself tonight." As the car pulled away, a gentle peace settled over him, a peace not born of victory, but of closure. He leaned back, watching the streaks of light fade behind the horizon. In his mind, his mother's voice returned, soft as a prayer. Make them respect you without ever raising your voice. And somewhere above the clouds, another flight lifted into the dark, steady and sure, carried not just by engines, but by a lesson the world would remember sometimes. It takes one man refusing to move to remind everyone else how to rise. The story of Malcolm Rivers reminds us that true strength isn't always loud. It's often found in stillness, in grace under pressure. When the world challenges your worth, the greatest act of power can be refusing to let others define it. Respect, like trust, cannot be demanded. It must be earned, nurtured, and defended through integrity. Malcolm didn't win by fighting back with fury. He won by standing still, grounded in quiet certainty. His calm became his weapon, his dignity his shield. For older generations who have witnessed both progress and prejudice, this story is a reminder that change doesn't always come from noise. It comes from endurance, wisdom, and courage to remain true to one's principles. In a world that often rewards arrogance, Malcolm's story teaches us that real power is not about controlling others. It's about commanding respect without losing kindness. Because sometimes, the most powerful movement begins when one person simply refuses to move. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. If Malcolm's story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that remind the world of compassion, courage, and the quiet strength of human dignity. See you in the next story where truth always finds its voice.